I would love to bring you straw hats and trumpets, Christmas poppers, festive edition, but it's difficult, because this was an annus horribilis. This was a year in which, literally, Armageddon was not far away. It was a year in which our governments marched us into war after war, either directly or indirectly. It was a year in which our governments betrayed us, betrayed the interests of our people, betrayed the national economies of Western countries, and endangered the citizens, or in our case, the subjects in the United Kingdom. It was a year of terror. It was a year of war and suffering. And it's difficult to put a straw hat and a festive trumpet onto that. I suppose the only light in this light and shade edition is that we did actually reach the end of the year alive, if not alive and kicking. It's difficult to recall the subjects that I talked about at the beginning of the year, for they were quite quickly consumed by life-threatening, life-changing events, and which, as I say, oftentimes looked as if they might be terminal. It was an annus horribilis for Gayatri and me. But I'll come to that later. But for the people of many parts of the world, death stalked all continents, either by individual acts of terror or by organized state acts that threatened the peace and, in fact, the very survival of the world. As I said earlier, I have been to Armageddon, literally. It is a hole called Megiddo nowadays, and it's very, very close to Gaza. And Gaza was a leitmotif throughout the entire year of 2025 and into 2026. I have absolutely no doubt. In fact, it's been a leitmotif of my life. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen to support Israel rather than Palestine. The truth is that the peace of the world is probably most threatened, although there are contenders, by events in what we call the Holy Land, in which the great religions were born. The great religions, monotheistic religions, all came from an area which is now regularly consumed by fire and blood. It's hard to recall now how epic were the events in June, for example, the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, an all-out war which began with a sneak attack, although it was no surprise to the United States of America, as Donald Trump later admitted. It started with a mass campaign of elimination, of assassination, of murder, most foul, of leaders and scientists in their homes with their families being systematically eliminated. The Israeli armed forces and the Fifth Column, which had supported them there, thought that this would get them off to a flying start in the war to destroy the Islamic Republic of Iran. It didn't work out like that, but there were days when it seemed as if it might. But Iran had, as our guests repeatedly reminded everyone in the foregoing period, had the means and definitely had the will to respond in kind. And in the end, Israel was forced to beg for a ceasefire. Donald Trump has admitted that too. In the end, Israel sustained strategic damage and a great deal of elimination of some of their own most important people in the state. Netanyahu's house himself was repeatedly targeted, though he was, of course, as leaders are on these occasions, deep underground. The fireworks, the firestorm that hit Tel Aviv was so damaging to the Israeli psyche and to the psyche of those who support and sustain Israel that they had to ban the videos off the internet. There was a hit record, I think it was Boom Boom Tel Aviv, something of that kind. And it was so spectacular, it had to be banished, though you can still find it if you look for it hard enough. The events in Gaza were, of course, a leitmotif of a terrible year. It's not yet clear how many people perished in Gaza, but it's not yet clear because a very significant number of the bodies are still under the rubble. A very significant number of the bodies were consumed by wild dogs, feral animals, living freely in the carnage that became the Gaza Strip. But the best guess that anyone can make is well over 100,000 dead Palestinians, maybe 2, maybe 3 times that amount. And of course, if you factor in the wounded, with no hospitals to treat them, the psychologically damaged, with conditions that will probably never be diagnosed, the amputees, Gaza had and has the biggest cohort of amputated people ever seen on the face of the earth. Gaza has still the biggest number of amputated children ever recorded in human history. Just think about that. There were times when we opened our telephones, opened our computers, and viewed the social media, that we were so aghast we could only sit back and weep. There were times when the horror was just too much to bear, and that was only for us looking at it, not for the people actually experiencing it. People in tents consumed by fire. People with their entire family bloodline wiped out in a single horrific attack. Some of it, I am very, very sad to say, undoubtedly helped by the British Royal Air Force. Yes, the heroes of the Battle of Britain were press-ganged by a British Prime Minister to coordinate with that firestorm to make the surveillance flights from the British base at Akrotiri in Cyprus, to help the gunners, to help the bombers, to help the terrorists who set fire to canvas $50 tents containing entire families. They were consumed by multi-million-dollar airstrikes. It was a period of such horror. Slaughter, slaughter everywhere, and in Gaza, often not a drop to drink, not a morsel to eat, not so much as a painkiller to dull the agony. It was a period in which it often looked like the NATO war against the Russian Federation in Ukraine might well bring the world, not to regional war, horrific as that can be, but to World War III. The European barking chihuahua of Merz and Macron, previously Schulz before Merz, Merz and Macron and Starmer in the vanguard, seemed determined to bring their own countries into World War III, when they were singularly ill-equipped to fight it themselves. Their gamble, of course, was always that in any war with Russia, the United States would follow closely behind and come to the aid like the 7th Cavalry. But the 7th Cavalry is nowadays led by a General George Custer, who goes by the name of Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump does not want World War III. He wants to keep making money. He wants to keep erecting Trump towers and casinos and no doubt bordellos. He is a party guy after all, as the Epstein affair is making very, very clear indeed. Donald Trump is not the 7th Cavalry that the European leaders were hoping for, and they didn't get it. And so they are reduced to braggadocio, which is pathetic to those who know the truth, but chilling, terrifying, and for some, I suppose, exhilarating. The prospect of war not seen
since 1945, a world war. There are some fools, most of them in the mass media, who are paid to pretend that all of this is necessary and indeed inevitable. But as I keep saying, the British Army could comfortably fit into Villa Park a mid-table, mid-level English football stadium, and that includes the clerks, the hairdressers, the malingerers, those in the sick bay, and those who are only there for the baby sham, and I don't mean the women. Our Air Force could simply not engage for a day with the formidable, world-class Russian anti-aircraft missile batteries. And our Navy has become a comic opera, a Gilbert and Sullivan parody of what the Royal Navy once was.